Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for locking in on the video side, audio podcast side as well. I do appreciate you all. Coming up Thursday night, going to be live. It's been a minute since I've been live at Imperial Pizza, but we're going to have Brianna Aldridge, sportscaster at Channel 7. She is going to be joining me live. That's later this week. As for today, as usual, this time of week, I'm joined by my good friend, Anthony Marino. What's going on, man? How you doing? Hopefully, I mean, it's technically Memorial Day while we're recording this, but hopefully you got to enjoy your holiday weekend a little bit. Time for some fun, a little bit of reflection, of course, as always, this weekend. How you doing, man?
Yeah, all good. Was away with the family for a couple days, and today this is my break from doing mulch out front to catch up with you for a little bit. So it's not a bad escape.
Maybe I'm a bad husband. Maybe I'm a bad husband, man, because you bring up mulch. We went to Home Depot actually Sunday and bought like 10 bags, but my wife's out there doing the mulch. I'm not doing it. She's doing it. Doing a great job with it. So we're going to spend some time today. This won't be, you know what? I'm not going to say that. I always say this isn't going to be a particularly long episode, then it ends up being plenty long. But we're going to talk about a handful of Buffalo Bills players that I think, anyway, we'll find out if Anthony agrees, have plenty to prove this year. Before we get going, though, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
I was having a conversation this weekend with somebody, and I thought this was a really interesting question, and I wanted to get what your opinion is on this. Someone asked me, they said, if you could be a pro athlete at any sport in the world right now, you could be a professional athlete. In your mind, you know, you're physically gifted enough. We're 25 years younger than we are right now. You could be a pro athlete in any sport, and you got to factor in all the stuff that comes with it, though. Money, your love for whatever that sport is, the physical, like wear and tear on your body, schedule, travel, family, being away, popularity of that sport, being recognized everywhere you go, potentially, depending if whether you want to or not. Factor in anything you want. If you took all that stuff and you could be a professional athlete, any sport, what would you pick and why?
I mean, listen, if you talk about all of those factors, it's like, okay, there's probably a greater analysis that would go into this and all the things that you would look at and say, okay, how does that play in? But if I'm just going with my heart, I mean, it would be to play in the NBA. Like that was the dream. I don't even want to say growing up, because up until I was about 12, I wanted to play Major League Baseball. But I think when you look at the NBA, when I see what the league is, it's this international game.
Mm-hmm.
I love the game, right? So I mean, it's that part where if there was anything that I could pick, that would be the one. Now, again, it would probably be one of those things if you're like, oh, well, based on physical ability, longevity, but like, yeah, I'm not getting into all of that. But just when you talk about like the love of the game, NBA would be where it's at for me.
What's funny too is you're a big guy, but in the NBA, what would you be, like a small forward?
I'd be a point guard. I'm 6'5". Like small forwards are like 6'8".
Yeah, that's true. You would be you would be a point guard. I think for that question, and I spent actually a lot of time thinking about it. I think it shifted. Growing up, I wanted to be a baseball player too. Like that would be my dream. I mean, if you're a Yankees fan, what kid doesn't grow up wanting to be, center fielder for the New York Yankees? Although I was always a terrible outfielder. Even when I was a kid, I was more of a second baseman, third baseman type. But yeah, it would have been baseball growing up. I think as an adult now, as I've gotten older, and maybe it's because I've fallen in love with the sport later in my life as opposed to being young, I think I would like to be a professional golfer. Like I'd love to be a great golfer on the PGA Tour. First of all, those guys make a ton of money. The good ones do anyway. I mean,
The good ones do. There's no guaranteed contracts for those guys.
exactly.
You miss the cut,
Yeah.
you get nothing that week.
That's true. All right. Well, maybe I should have prefaced the question by saying this. Like, if you could pick any sport, like say you pick basketball, and you're not gonna be the 12th guy on the bench. You know what I mean? You're gonna be a starter. Like, you don't gotta be, you're not gonna be an MVP candidate, maybe not even an all-star, but you're gonna be a starter or a guy who comes off and gives you minutes every day. Golf, yeah, I'm not gonna be a guy who's struggling to keep his PGA card and it's got to grind every week to stay on the tour. But the like I said, the money's good for most of them. I kind of like the fact you're right. There's nothing that's guaranteed. You got to make the cut. But I like the fact, basketball, you could go out there, you could drop 25 and 10 and your team just doesn't have and you still lose. You know what I mean? It's a team sport, which is great to watch. But as a player, I don't know. I kind of like controlling my own destiny. Well, to an extent, because you can go out and shoot 800 and still lose because you can't play defense on Scotty Scheffler or Rory McIlroy or those guys. But just, I don't know. I feel like it'd be, first of all, again, I love playing golf now. I'm not good at it, but I love playing golf. I love being out on the course. It's just a vibe that I love. You travel plenty. You get treated like royalty. These PGA guys get treated like royalty every tournament that they go to. If you're not struggling to be able to keep your card, you kind of pick and choose what tournament you want to play in as well. So if you want to get some time off at some point during the season, if little sister's getting married, you could take that week off where it's not so easy. Sometimes these guys in basketball, they miss the birth of their kids because they got a game that night, you know what I mean? And they can't get off. But the money, physically, probably not as much wear and tear on your body, just seeing the world, just getting treated like a superstar. Plus, if you're not an elite world-class golfer, you could probably go to a restaurant with your wife and not get mobbed. Whereas if you're a great player on the Boston Celtics, you ain't going nowhere. You know what I mean?
I get it. You spent a lot of time thinking about this. I took about 8 seconds of my analysis, and you're like, I imagine you got like spreadsheets with pros and cons and everything like that breaking out. So
it's funny. I am a spreadsheet guy too, as well. Let me ask you this: if you were playing in the NBA, you don't strike me as the kind of guy. I don't think ego would ever be an issue with you. Do you want to be like famous though? You don't strike me as the guy who would like to be famous. Like there's a part of me that would love to be famous. I don't get that sense when it comes to you though.
No, I think when you're younger, I think there's a part of that. And then as you get older, it's just kind of like, you don't need limelight or a crowd or anything along those lines. Like you're good and you're kind of content. At least that's where I find myself. So yeah, no, I would not need any sort of fame that comes with it.
All right, fair enough. So when we get into some Bills talk here, like I said, in just a couple minutes, I want to talk about some Bills players that I feel have plenty to prove this year. So we're at the end of May. We're getting into June now. This is kind of like the real lull of an NFL calendar year. There's just not a lot going on. I'll say this too. Last year on June 1st, the Bills ended up signing Leonard Floyd, which was obviously a big deal. He ended up with 10.5 sacks. They also signed on June 1st last year, Brandon Shell, an offensive tackle. He was supposed to be anyway, the primary, like the swing tackle last year, but he ended up retiring. When the Bills cut Trey White, it kind of felt like, because that was a post June 1st cut, that the Bills were going to save some money and kind of be active June 1st. I'll tell you, Anthony, the way a couple weeks ago played out, I don't think that's the case anymore, because what do they really got left to add to this roster? Because they signed MVS. So, I mean, that's probably almost certainly your fifth wide receiver. They already signed Chase Claypool. I mean, how many receivers are they possibly going to add right now? If you go sign a notable receiver, or if you were to swing a trade after June 1st or something like that, now I talk about MVS, possibly not even on the roster. Defensive end, I would have said 100%. But they got Epinesa and they got Rizzo and they got Vaughn, and then they signed Smoot and they gave him a contract that certainly feels like that's your fourth defensive end because of the guaranteed money. So they locked in 2 receivers. They locked in a defensive end in May instead of June. I really don't think we're going to see what we saw last year, where there's a significant signing coming up here on June. You kind of agree with that?
I do. Well, let's put it this way. When you say significant, right? So I don't see significant in the Leonard Floyd side of things where you're like, hey, this is a guy that's going to play and contribute based on his numbers the last 2 years. I do think kind of a sneaky need that we haven't talked about enough is probably cornerback, right? Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas in the last year of his deal. You know, we can talk about Kaiir Elam and what he has left, but you don't have that Dane Jackson replacement right now, right? Someone that has some starting experience, that is certainly steady. So I think if there's something that I'm going to keep an eye on, maybe like cornerback depth. And it's not someone that would come in and start. Like, I don't see them having some sort of a rotation, but depending on, maybe to hedge themselves that, like, listen, we're one twisted ankle away from Kaiir Elam being out there. Do you have that confidence? Do you not? I think if they do something at cornerback, will kind of tip their hand to how they feel about Elam.
That's a little bit of a spoiler too, by the way, coming up when we get into some players. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that could definitely, I could see a corner being in the mix as of right now. Jamarcus Ingram's like going to be the only challenge for that CB3 boundary CB3 guy as things stand right now. You're right. And then the other thing I was thinking of was potentially maybe a guard. I mean, right now, David Edwards is, it feels to me like David Edwards is just being handed the starting guard job. Alec Anderson is like the only depth right now. Now that they signed Leal Collins, but Brandon Bean kind of made it sound like he was there to play tackle.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, we've seen the team add depth pieces along the offensive line all the time, right? So that would not surprise me either. But two, we talk about this June 1st, the money from Trey White, like they're going to need a chunk of that money just to sign their rookie class.
Sure.
Like, no one has signed yet. I'm anticipating sometime around June 1st, you'll get that one press release announcing that they've signed the entire rookie class.
Right.
That will be done. I mean, it won't take up, even half of the money. So they'll still have stuff that they can play with, but it'll be interesting to see. And then like the whole Micah Hyde piece, like, you're going to need some stuff to, whether it's to make a move for him or other guys during the season, if somebody goes down in training camp. So, you want something in the back pocket.
Yeah, for sure. Dalton Risner, Greg Van Roden, remember him? He was with Bills a couple years ago. He started with the Raiders last year. Anyway, I was looking up some potential free agents still at guard. I think they'll add to that. Again, you're right. No Leonard Floyds are coming here post June 1st, but I think there'll be a couple of additions to this team. By the way, you mentioned Micah Hyde. Got me thinking. We talked about him last week too. I don't know that he's done, but Sean McDermott kind of talked about him almost like past tense by accident a few times during his statement last week. And now I've kind of come to the position where last week I'm like, there's a good chance he's playing again. Now I'm like, he's going to be in shape and ready to go if something happens. Injuries.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Jerry Ostrowski, who I used to be with over at Rumblings, and now he and Joe Miller, John Fina, doing their Overreaction Buffalo network. And Jerry was talking the other day, and he was saying, like, listen, I think that Micah Hyde will come back, but he's like, I'm going to be his agent. And he goes, you don't show up until like the end of that last preseason game, right? Like, he doesn't need training camp, doesn't need OTAs, doesn't need the preseason. Like,
right.
You're a vet that has earned that. Like, everyone knows Michael will stay in shape, do what he needs to do. He understands the playbook and the defense and all of these types of things. That was his suggestion, which I feel like made some sense too. And not that just, Hyde is playing coy or anything along these lines, but you can't come out and say like, yeah, I want to play again, but I'm not going to sign until, August 15th until I can, kind of not have to deal with any of this stuff. So, but that will be a big storyline over these next few months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he has made it really clear too. He's either playing for the Bills or he ain't playing.
Yeah.
And that's something good for Sean Brandon to have in their back pocket. If something happens to Mike Edwards, that's a quick phone call. If for whatever reason Mike Edwards is not catching on to your defense or he doesn't look as good as you're hoping he does, again, that's a quick phone call to Micah Hyde. It certainly sounds like if the Bills call, he'd come back. That's speculation. We don't know that. That's just me speculating, but that's what the feeling I get, the gut I get is Micah's saying, well, if they call me, I'll be there. As long as it's not day one of training camp. He's not going to come back for an entire training camp. And then the other thing, too, I mean, we're talking about veteran players here. I wanted to ask you this. Again, pure speculation. I'm not going to go as far as to say it's like a major concern, but are you a little bit surprised? OTAs are going on now again, and we're at the end of May, and Matt Milano is not a full go yet. I mean, he got hurt in week 4 in London last year. Been a while. I remember a lot of speculation if the Bills were to get to the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship, would Milano be able to come back? Obviously, that answer would have been no. But now here we sit, Anthony, end of May. He's still not full go. Sean McDermott kind of said that he wasn't going to, he'd be able to only do some things until training camp, and hopefully, he'll be full go. But like 1 to 10, do you have what's your level of concern right now that Matt Milano is not out there running wild at the end of May as we get into June?
So when you talk about it to that question, it's like a 2, right? Now I say that because it's OTAs, it's voluntary. There is no need for him to rush back for OTAs. Like,
sure.
Hey, you're recovering, training camp, even what that looks like. So when you ask me like 1 to 10, it's pretty low on that meter. I'm going to be more curious when he does come back. Does he still have that, same look? Like, what is the recovery like? I mean, you talk about that's a pretty gruesome injury that takes place. Like, does he just come back one day and it's like, oh, that's the same Matt Milano that we all know and love, and thumbs up, good to go, no big deal? Or is it going to be more along the lines of just like, hey, like something looks like he's a little bit off? And listen, not that he's in the same age range as like Von Miller, but we saw with Trey White and his recovery sometimes too. Like, okay, you're back, and these guys, they're back out on the field, but they don't exactly look like they did, before the injury. And it's kind of part of that recovery, the physical part, the mental part that, I don't know, Matt Milano might not look like the same player in 2024, might not be till the 2025 season or later in the 2024 season that you see him kind of coming back to form. But that's a lot of speculation right there.
No, absolutely. It's definitely speculation. And am I wrong? Like, he didn't tear his ACL. It was never reported. He didn't tear his ACL. He didn't tear his Achilles. It was a broken leg with other stuff, but never. Am I wrong? I don't think there was anything ever actually reported in terms of what was wrong with him specifically, other than the broken leg.
There wasn't stuff that was specifically reported. And it's funny because as you bring this up, Jerry Ostrowski was talking about this too. And it was an injury that he suffered when he played with the Bills. Now, obviously, right, the procedures, the technology, a little bit different today than it was when Jerry was playing. But, Jerry was saying like, yeah, you can have some of those concerns because there's effects that it has on the muscles. There's effects that it has on the cartilage. Like, there's some things that go with that doesn't just, it's not as simple as just a broken bone. So, with it, I think, listen, we all wanted to see Matt Milano out there kind of, running around and just to be like, hey, okay, he's 100% good to go. But I thought Sean McDermott's comments that you noted earlier were very positive as it related to Milano and him being ready for training camp. And we all know Sean McDermott is not one to paint any sort of optimism unless there's a real reason to, right? Usually he'll kind of talk around it or say, well, we'll have to see. Like, Matt's going through the whole process, and when he's ready, he'll be out there. But until then, you can say a lot of words without saying anything. He was positive, and he did not have to be. So I'll take that as a good sign.
For sure. And hopefully he's back 100%. Just the thought of getting a 100% pre-leg injury Matt Milano on the same football field with what we saw from Terrell Bernard last year is really potentially exciting, especially with the healthy DaQuan Jones in front of them, for sure. All right, so I got a handful of Buffalo Bills players that I feel have plenty to prove, and I want to be real clear about this too. This isn't a power ranking. This isn't like 1 through 5. And also, it's not the only 5. I mean, we could sit here and probably go up and down this roster and make a case for 30 to 35 players that actually have plenty to prove. But these are just guys that I kind of like cherry picked specifically that I wanted to talk about with you. And I want to start probably with what would be, I think anyway, the most obvious one, and that would be Von Miller. I think he needs to prove that he's not washed up, and he needs to prove that he's not a guy who's got 1 year left on his contract, and then the Bills are definitely going to cut him. Contractually, I wanted to make sure I had looked this up. A lot of people assume this is going to be Von Miller's last year with the Bills. Contractually, after the season, if the Bills were to cut him on a normal cut, like at the end of the year before June 1st, they would eat about $15.5 million of dead cap money, and they would save about 8.5. So they'd be eating a lot of dead cap money, but 8.5 million is a lot of money to save as well. If they were to cut him post June 1st, like they did with Trey White this past offseason, it would be 6.3 million in dead cap money, but that would also be a figure for 2 years down the road. But they would save $17.5 million. So financially, there could potentially be, and plus his age, lots of incentive to cut him. Again, the guy's got to prove to me he's not washed up. He's 35 years old. Probably, if you ask me, maybe the biggest surprise of this offseason to me is that when it comes to the defensive end position, they lose Leonard Floyd. They bring back AJ Epinesa. I'm probably most surprised that the Bills didn't do something maybe a little more urgent or significant than sign Dwayne Smoot in May. And I'm also talking about the draft where, you know, you're on the wide receiver train, but I thought for sure the Bills would have used no later than a day 2 pick on an edge guy, and they didn't. So the opportunity is going to be there for Von Miller. I feel like actions speak louder than words, and it's kind of almost like a little bit of a vote of confidence, at least for Von Miller, but he's got a lot to prove because the success of this defensive line might hinge on him being at least what Leonard Floyd was last year. You know what I'm saying? Like, or do you think that maybe that's a little bit too much? What are your thoughts right now? Von Miller, plenty to prove.
Yeah, my bar is a little bit lower. And again, right, it's like you're not putting the size of the contract along the same lines with what the expectation are. So, right, you can listen to what I'm going to say and just be like, well, you're not paying whatever $20 million for 6.5 sacks, but it's kind of more along the lines of just like, you know, can Von Miller give you the AJ Epinesa production, right? Can Rousseau take a step up? Can Epinesa maybe be more of the Leonard Floyd? And, you know, does Von Miller kind of, you know, again, fill that Epinesa void? Like, yeah, you're playing maybe 35 to 40% of the snaps. You're getting 6 to 8 sacks on the season. Like, you know, you can wreak some havoc, but you're not looked at to be the guy. And, you know, to me, that's where my expectation is. It's like, listen, if you can get that, then I'm fine with it this year. If it's anything close to like more so what he was last season, then like he should just be inactive every Sunday, because that's just, you know, he's washed and move on and whatever you have to do. So, but yeah, it was surprising. Like when you do look back to the draft, I think there was that sneaky part of you, right? It's almost like, you know, leading into the first round, you're like, God, I really don't want him to take a defensive end in the first round.
Right.
But then there's the part of you that's just like, all right, well, maybe if you take one in the second or if in the third, like that's not necessarily a bad thing either. And again, you make a move for Smoot, like here's a guy that can come in, that can produce. I mean, not that there's a ton of snaps to be had, because we are going to assume that Von Miller will be better than he was last year and able to play more than he was last year. And if anything, I don't blame Von Miller as much for last season as I do Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Like, you did not need to activate him as soon as you did. You did not need to have him on the field. Right. He did not need to be active on game days. Like, he was not there. And it seemed obvious to everyone, but to the Buffalo Bills front office and coaching staff. So, to me, it's like you could have waited. You could have ramped him up more. It felt like you rushed to get him out there, and he didn't do anything. So it was like, and then it's like, if you're going to rush to get him out there and then you realize he's not ready yet, that's fine. But then just sit him on Sundays instead of, having him active and playing, however many percentage of snaps that he did. So
that's a great point, man. Yeah, you know what? You're right. The coaching staff, the organization deserves some criticism for him being back as early as he did too, because it was clear as day. You don't need to be a football expert. You don't need to be Eric Turner, Joe Marino, any of these guys to pop in the film and see that Von Miller was a lousy player early on, at least anyway. For most of the season, he wasn't all the way back, and the Bills made a decision to activate him, to get him on the field. But yeah, he's got, even if it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to get cut after this year, he's still got plenty to prove, because if he's not trying to retire, there's 31 other teams that he's going to try to show that he's got something left. And that he's not just a named player. How big of a role do you think he's going to have on this football team this year as things stand? Like, what does your gut tell you right now? It might change during the season, but as we're sitting there at the end of May, like, what kind of role, like what percentage of snaps? Do you see him? Is he a guy who's only going to come on the field, third down, surefire, passing, attempts? Is that what you see his role being right now?
No, probably a little more than that. And just based on, right, and here I am saying, like, listen, have him fill the Epinesa role of like 35% of snaps, but I don't think that's what the Bills are going to do based on what they did last year. I'd probably say it would end up being more in the 50 to 55% range. And again, but the production probably, let's put it this way. I'm eyeballing 8 sacks. It's like, can you get like 8 sacks? Can you, and that there's more to it than that. There's the pressures, there's the run stopping, there's all these different things, but it's just like, from that standpoint, it's just like, if you can do that, okay, you've done enough of your job. Force the offensive, play callers, offensive coordinators to like account for where you are on the field at all times. I'm not looking for you to be a Pro Bowler. I'm just looking for you to, be able to make a difference, here and there.
All right, I'm back with Anthony Marino. We are discussing a handful of Buffalo Bills players that got plenty to prove. You talked about a guy earlier. I kind of want to get into him now a little bit. Kaiir Elam is definitely on my list as well. I think if nothing else, he has to prove that he's not a first-round bust. And I guess bust could be open to interpretation. Like, if you're talking about a guy who's going to be a good starting corner, I think that ship has pretty much already sailed. At least in Buffalo, I feel like it has. But I think right now, you mentioned also, I'm glad you mentioned him too earlier, Dane Jackson. I kind of feel like the ceiling for Kaiir Elam right now is to be that Dane Jackson for the Buffalo Bills this year. Douglas is going to start. Bernard's going to start. Benford's going to start. And one of those two guys are bound to go down at some point. So that third corner, he might not start the year as a starter, but he's going to get opportunity. And I feel like, as things stand right now, at least anyway, Kaiir Elam is in line for that. And he's got to prove that he can play in this league. I mean, if you want to stay in this league, simple as that, you got to prove you can play. I'll tell you, though, he makes mistakes, but he also made a play. He had an interception in, I believe, in that Pittsburgh playoff game. Didn't he last year, this past season? I think it was the Pittsburgh game. I know he had an interception late in the season. I remember that. I just don't remember who it was against. But you kind of feel like that. He's got like that Dane Jackson role seemingly set up for him. As things stand right now, if they don't bring a veteran who will take that spot for him. But man, you want to talk about a guy who's got plenty of proof. To me, Kaiir Elam going into what, year 3 now? This is
going into year 3.
Going into year 3. He's a guy that's got a lot to prove to this football team and to other teams around the league.
Yeah, it is for him. I mean, here's a guy that comes up in so many conversations. Right. I mean, you everything, right? In many ways, his name just pops up. And It's like, God, it's a guy that I want to see do well. And not just from a like, hey, the Buffalo Bills, that's my team. Like, of course, I want to see everyone do well. Just of like, all right, it seems like he puts in the work. It seems like he's a good kid. It seems like all these things of just like, you just want something to break in his favor. And I think even with some of it, like people look back to that game against Jacksonville last year. Like, I'm sorry, I felt like Sean McDermott did nothing to put him in a situation to succeed. It's like you sold out to try and generate a pass rush on Trevor Lawrence because, again, you put Von Miller out there who's not ready. And it's just like, so you're sending the farm and you got him going one-on-one against Calvin Ridley and, kind of these YOLO balls that are being thrown up. Like, I don't know. I don't know if Trey White could have covered in that situation. You know what I mean? Rasul Douglas, if he was on the roster, like, so it's a little bit interesting there. I think the change in defensive coordinator might be a good thing for him, right? Like we talked about Butler exiting as the defensive backs coach. Okay, now you got Bobby Babbitt. You've got a new backs coach coming in, like kind of some fresh eyes, like, but it's year 3, right? I mean, if there's anyone that has something to prove, because if he can prove something this year, you can look at it and say, and I'm not even talking 5th-year option, but just like, hey, is this a guy that could replace Rasul Douglas as a starter in the future?
Sure.
Yeah, this, year 3 is usually the year, right, for a rookie. Like you talk about that year 3 jump. This is going to be the one for him, and kind of let's see what he can do.
He's one of the bigger enigmas of Bills players to me, at least in recent memory, because he can look really good at times. I remember going back to the Bengals playoff loss where they got smacked at home in 2022. And I remember saying it would be nice if someone on the defense other than Matt Milano and Kaiir Elam showed up. I thought Kaiir Elam played really good in that game. It was everyone else who was getting torched in the secondary. And then I remember saying, well, I'm really looking forward to seeing this guy in camp this past summer. So I remember keeping a really steady eye on him. And him and Stephon Diggs were having some really, really, really spirited battles at camp. And he would look really good on a Monday. Then you go to camp on Tuesday and he's lost all over the field. The coaches are screaming at him. He's making mistake after mistake and getting yanked. And I kind of feel like that's his big problem right now. Like he is capable of making plays. He is capable of being a good corner. But it just seems to me like he is completely prone to mental mistakes on the field, just not being where he's supposed to be. And he's also incredibly handsy, and that can be really frustrating as well. I mean, he's constantly getting called for penalties. But yeah, I think he sits in a spot right now going into year 3 where you're hoping optimistically that he's your Dane Jackson this year. Kind of CB3, you feel like it's like wide receiver 4. Like it might not matter at the beginning of the season, but somebody's going to go down. One of your receivers is going to go down during a game, miss a couple weeks, and then that guy's got to step up. I kind of feel like that's the same thing with the CB3 boundary, right? You feel like that way?
It does. And it's interesting too. Well, I think it was last week's show. We were talking about Christian Benford, and it was like, he said something, Benford missing the game in the playoffs against the Chiefs. And I'm like, Benford missed the game, right? I remember Terrell Bernard missing the game, and I wasn't sure of that. And then it was just like, wait, did Kaiir Elam play in that game? But he did not. Dane Jackson was the one who started opposite of Rasul Douglas, who was basically playing on one leg at that time too. So it just, that Dane Jackson role, like that's significant. Like that's someone that, you're going to have an opportunity. And so for Elam, I don't think it's one where it's just, he's going to be on the roster and maybe play some special teams and we won't hear from him. The way things sit right now, we will see him on the field.
It's funny. We sit there. This guy's got something to prove. And here's the reason. You just summed it up in one sentence. Kaiir Elam's got something to prove because the Bills played Rasul Douglas on one leg last year in the playoff game, as opposed to turning to Kaiir Elam when everything was on the line. That should tell you right there all you need to know about how much this kid has to prove. All right, moving along. Number 3 here out of 5. I went with Taylor Rapp. He needs to prove to me that he's the guy that we saw at the end of the season when he got a start, or he played a lot in the Miami game. He was sensational in the Miami game. especially on that final drive. I mean, an incredible diving interception, which unfortunately he got hurt on, missed the playoffs, which, of course, like with many other guys, hurt the Bills' defense. But also the play before that, he had a hell of a breakup on it would have been a long pass to Tyreek Hill. It would have put Miami in the red zone. Anyway, he looked the part. He looked really good. They cut Jordan Poyer. They gave Taylor Rapp a contract, but not a contract that is like, overwhelming. Like only this year is the only money of his contract that is actually guaranteed. I went and I looked it up. Anyway, he needs to prove that he's the player that we saw in the Miami game because he did not have a great season. I remember talking to Bruce Nolan and him kind of being specific, did not think too much of Taylor Rapp's 2023 season with the Bills. He needs to prove that he's that guy, largely in part because they just used a second-round pick on Cole Bishop. So they like Cole Bishop. They used a second-round pick on a safety, and he's just going to be looking over his shoulder, waiting in the wings to get on the football field. So Taylor Rapp's got plenty to prove if he wants to keep that starting job.
Yeah, I'm not sold on Taylor Rapp, and I don't even know, like, from this standpoint. And I'm a little jilted right now because it was Taylor Rapp who collided with Khalil Shakir during OTAs the other day. And, Shakir's down on the turf for like 35, 45 seconds. Trainers had to rush over to check on him. With Taylor Rapp, it's just like, are you this new version of just kind of a, unnecessary 15-yard penalty just waiting to happen each and every situation? It's like, listen, I appreciate the kind of pedal to the metal mentality and, safety that can lay a big hit and make a big play. But it's just like, right now, I'm like, I'm all in on Cole Bishop. And it's like, I want to see him win the job.
Yeah.
From the beginning. If it's Cole Bishop and Micah Hyde starting in week 1, I will be a happy man and I will not care about Taylor Rapp's contract. So I know that's a little, but just like when it comes to that type of stuff, it's just, we don't need any friendly fire to take anyone out, especially someone like Khalil Shakir. So to me, I'm a little sour on Taylor Rapp right now. Maybe next week I'll be in a little bit of a better
a little bit of a feisty Anthony Marino here on Taylor Rapp. Yeah, look, in his contract too, so we're clear, he signed a 3-year contract. Even if he were to back up safety, it's not a stupid cap number. It's not like, say, a Mitch Morse type or a Trey White type number where, if this guy's not a starter and he's not a great starter, we don't need to keep him. But yeah, in terms of having something to prove, he's got plenty to prove. He's going to hold on to what, for now at least anyway, seems to be a starting job. Very up and down player. And yeah, he had a couple penalties last year too, as well. A little bit of head hunting as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, he's got plenty to prove. Another guy with plenty to prove is, to me anyway, Conor McGovern, because the Bills are moving him to center. And he needs to prove he can effectively play center right now in the NFL. He needs to prove that it wasn't a mistake for Brandon Beane in his front office to decide to move on from Mitch Morse and to also trade Ryan Bates. Last year they had 3 options at center. Right now, in terms of NFL starting experience, they only got 1, and it's Conor McGovern. So he's got to prove that this was the right decision to move him to center. Obviously, if your center's not playing well, that's going to affect the entire offense. So that's very important. And also, he needs to prove he can play center so that they drafted a rookie, Cedric Van Pran Granger. That guy is a 5th-round pick, only allowed 1 sack in 3 years at Georgia, 3-year starter at Georgia. So, if he's not playing well, there's going to be some buzz and maybe a little bit of heat on Conor McGovern earlier that he's not the guy to play center. So I feel like he's got plenty to prove because you moved on from a very credible, established center in Mitch Morse.
Yeah, and I think the piece for McGovern, and I know you said this isn't a ranking, it's not a tier, it's nothing like that.
Sure.
He might actually be the one at the top of the list, right? And even when we went through the exercise with Joe Marino and the others for Locked On Bills, like Conor McGovern was probably one of the, if you have any regrets of like, gosh, maybe I should have included him on my list. Now that you take a look at it, like that is going to be somewhat critical because and it's critical not just because of the importance of the center position and, the exchange and relationship with Josh Allen and all of those pieces, but it's like you are replacing Mitch Morris. Like, that is the one move that I think felt universally surprising to everyone, that like nobody wanted to see Mitch Morris leave. Fans, members of the media, like there's no one that I've seen say like, oh, good, he was washed or this and that. Like, he was past his prime. Like, Mitch Morris was still playing at a high level. You saw just, again, the exchange from center to quarterback, like, is something that's underrated. Many people think like, oh, it's just simple. It's like, it is not that simple. When you've got a 330-pound behemoth like breathing right in front of you, ready to knock you over, and you've got to make that exchange to Josh Allen, as quickly and effectively as you possibly can. There's a lot that comes with that. And Conor McGovern, and to a lesser extent, David Edwards too, right? Because it's just like they both need to hit based on what we talked about before from a depth standpoint, but just, you do this shuffling. Okay, you took something that was working pretty well and you shuffled it to save some dollars. We understand that part, but it better work.
I take back to what I said earlier. I said that maybe not addressing defensive end further was the biggest surprise of the offseason for me. I take that back already. Because to me, maybe what might have been the most surprising thing in the offseason is how much they tinkered with an offensive line that was really good last year. What were we all saying last year? You, I, literally everybody who's a Bills fan. This was the best offensive line of the Josh Allen era, right? Yeah. And they got rid of the center and they moved the guard to center. So they actually are replacing 2/5 now of the offensive line, essentially 40% of the line. Big surprise. So yeah, you're right. Everything you said, plenty to prove. Also, financially, right now he's got a $4.1 million cap at this year. Next year, that number rises to 9.4. It's a lot. Yeah. So, for his own, he's got a lot to prove to feel that he's worth keeping around beyond this year as well. So there's that. All right. And I got one more, and I'm going to admit this, maybe a reach. I'll get your thoughts here in a second on that. Definitely would probably, I'd say, be a surprise. Most people are probably going to look at me like, huh? But I actually got James Cook on my list. And you're like, well, hold on a second, man. This dude was 4th in the NFL in rushing. He was 7th in the NFL in yards from scrimmage. And didn't we just talk about him in a completely different light, like literally last week? In terms of like players that the people around the league might be sleeping on. We had him on our list last week. So now this week I come back and I got him on my You Got a Lot to Prove list. I have him on this list because I think he needs to prove that he can be trusted to make catches in the passing game. And you go back and you watch the highlights and the lowlights of James Cook last year, and quite literally, dude, he dropped 4 passes that should have been touchdowns. 3 of them were for sure touchdowns.
Yeah.
And the 4th one probably was a touchdown. That's got to be frustrating for Joe Brady, for Josh Allen, for Sean McDermott to go and watch those tapes and wonder why your running back is dropping touchdown passes. And I think actions, again, kind of speak louder than words. And I'm not saying it's only for this reason, but the Bills draft Ray Davis in the 4th round when they could have used a defensive end like we talked about, like when they could have used another corner like we've talked about today. They took a running back. They took a running back who's a tough, hard-nosed runner, but somebody who's really good catching the football out of the backfield. To me, doesn't feel like that much of a coincidence. Plus, I like what Ty Johnson did once Joe Brady took over. So if James Cook wants to be a featured running back that stays on the field all the time, unless he's really, he needs a blow because he's tired or whatever, he's got to prove that he can be trusted to not drop the football, because those were some bad drops last year.
Yeah, I thought that it was fair to include him on the list. When you sent it to me beforehand, it wasn't one of those where, I wasn't shaking my head saying like, "Come on, Pat, what are you talking about?" I right. think for James Cook, and even when you think to you draft Ray Davis, but like Latavius Murray not on the roster anymore. That's a guy that early in the season that was doing some of the dirty work for the Bills. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, they're as good as Cook was last year. Right. It's not like you look at something and say like, oh my gosh, like this guy is, he's reached his peak, and kind of that ability to be active in the passing game. And let's be honest, for anyone that is a playmaker on offense, there's a chance to prove yourself a bit more because Stephon Diggs is not there anymore.
Right.
So it's like everyone else is going to kind of like pick up some of that slack. It's not that they made one addition that, oh, hey, we got a Brandon Ayuk or a T. Higgins or someone like that you're, basically doing an even type of swap, or at least that you can see that. No, for James Cook, like, he's going to have the ability to do more. And I think that, him as a pass catcher, when he came out, was something that we saw, right? It's like, hey, they didn't get a big bruising back. Like, they got someone that's got some speed that, you get the ball in his hands, can catch passes out of the backfield. And that's something that really hasn't materialized in a way that, if you want to compare him to like an Alvin Kamara type, that, all right, well, hey, is he going to be able to get 75 catches out of the backfield or more and, really kind of be that all around type of weapon? So yeah, I'll back you up on that one.
It's you're right too. I'm glad you said that. I was really high on James Cook coming out of college, which I want to be real clear too. I am still high on James Cook in the NFL too. I think he's a good player. I think he's a very good player, but yeah, he wasn't a featured, like, he only had like, I think maybe 12 carries was like his high in a game at Georgia. So he wasn't like carrying the rock a ton, but he was really good coming out of the backfield and catching the football. Now in the NFL, like last year, he was a really good running back. Like, he ran the ball well. He had some good plays in the passing game. I know he had a nice touchdown catch against the Chiefs when they won an Arrowhead during the season. But yeah, the drops were big, and he's going to have the opportunity to prove it, and he's going to have to, because otherwise I think you're going to see more Ray Davis, even as a rookie, maybe than you think. I always kind of got the sense with James Cook until like the second half of last year that Sean would be quick to put him in the doghouse. James Cook would miss an assignment, or, he fumbled once in the Denver game, then he got benched for an entire quarter. Dorsey was still the offensive coordinator, so who knows if that was Dorsey that made that call that time. But yeah, man, I think he's got plenty to prove. And like I said, man, I think we could sit here probably and go through maybe half the roster or more and talk about guys that have plenty to prove.
Well, sure. I mean, you can say that about you can say it about Josh Allen if you want to.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, in all seriousness, like, just like, okay, hey, yeah, Diggs moves on, this and that. Like, hey, Allen looks like he's in, better shape this offseason than maybe he has been in the past, like, whatever type of thing. Like, you could say it about everyone on the roster. Easily, you could say it about everyone. But I like the list that you put together.
No, I'm not going to include Keon Coleman. He's a rookie. It's just ridiculous to put a rookie on something to prove. But I will say this. I am still enjoying him. I'm not getting tired of seeing videos of him in interviews. I really, really, really hope this guy is as good as we hope he can be, because he just has personality and charm written all over him. And man, I know this fan base pretty well now, doing a show for 6 years, and he's going to be a guy, if he's close to being as good as we hope he can be, he's easily going to become one of the more 2 or 3 most popular players on this football team in short order too.
I keep referencing other shows, but I was catching up on Greg Thompson's show that he has. And I know Greg, a friend of yours as well.
Sure.
And he had one of the contributors from The Ringer was on, and, he was talking, and he said, there is no way that Keon Coleman is going to be good in the NFL. I'm paraphrasing. And his point is just like, this guy, like, it has nothing to do with analytics or tape or testing or anything like that. He goes, this guy is so likable and so enjoyable to listen to that I just can't think of a player that has come out and that has been, kind of that joyful, I guess, for lack of a better term, and gone on and been good, right? Like, usually it's like, whatever, the guy's got an attitude problem, or he's this or that, the wide receiver mentality, which is always this kind of like, I sleep with one eye open and I, carry a knife with me just because everybody's, got it out for me type of thing. He's like, Keon Coleman would basically break every single narrative like that, just based on who he is. And I think for everyone, and Joe Marino had said it, others, it's just like, man, I really hope this kid is good, because he's such a joy to see the way that he interacts. And, that is all, you think back to other players. I'm going on a little tangent here, but like, remember when Stephon Gilmore got drafted by the Bills, and everyone was all worked up because, like, he wasn't smiling at the podium. And people are, online, like, here he is in a family photo. Like, the guy doesn't smile at all. Like, it's just not his personality. Stop getting into that. But like, here is the guy that is literally showing a level of happiness around being in the NFL and more specifically joining the Buffalo Bills, that it just like, yeah, it is that part of just like, you hope that he's good. Like, I just want you to be, I don't even want to say like great. I'm not looking for you to be Stephon Diggs. Like,
Be Gabe Davis.
I just want you to be good.
Be 15% more than what Gabe Davis was. And I think now you got a really good guy that you got in the second round. That would be fantastic. He's a happy kid. And I keep going back to, God, I get sick of talking about Stephon, but I can't help it. The Bills trade him on April 3rd. It couldn't be more obvious that there's a lot of reasons why, but it just, the chemistry wasn't there. We can all agree on that. Whose fault it is, we could debate to the end of time. What we all could agree on is that there just wasn't that chemistry with Stephon and Josh and the staff and the organization at that point. You feel Keon Coleman's personality, as we're seeing it now post-draft, we're seeing these interviews, we're seeing these segments. You feel like that had maybe even a significant part of why the Bills drafted him. Of course, talent matters the most, but a tie goes to the personality, it seems, based on what the Bills, with Stephon and all that stuff kind of went through, that like his personality is certainly a part of the equation on why they took him.
Oh, sure. I mean, listen, and I know there's some fans that hate when Sean McDermott or others talk about culture. It is very real. The culture within your locker room, within your workplace, your organization, whatever it is a big deal. So to your point, right? Like, if you're talking about a tiebreaker between one guy and another, yeah, I see where this can play out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going to end with our weekly Finish the Sentence segment. This is, as always, 3 questions that I'm going to ask Anthony, an opportunity to kind of just a little bit of sense of some of the things he's thinking, get away from just, straight up sports talk here. I enjoy this. I know a lot of people who are watching, listen, do as well. Let's get going. So finish the sentence. Number 1, a TV show that needs to get rebooted and back on the air to continue is blank. I feel like I know what you're going to say, but maybe you might surprise me.
No, I don't think you are, because it's something that's that recent. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to say Ted Lasso. Like, it just ended a year ago, and I'm still holding out hope that something will take place there. I look at it more. I would love to see Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. come back. And, sometimes we talk about some of the Marvel stuff. That was a show that I enjoyed when it was on television, Phil Coulson and, others, kind of this group, and kind of running through that week to week episode. And at the time when the show was launched, there was like this divide at Marvel, right? You had the movie side of things, which was just like, we're doing this is what's most important. And this TV side was almost like a nuisance to the creative team. So you couldn't use certain characters. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. Like, everything was basically what you couldn't do. And the show had some, I'll say relative success, maybe not in the ratings, but it was around for 6 years because of like a passionate and rabid fan base. Now I feel like that divide at Marvel has kind of gone away. You've got the Disney Plus side of things that you probably could reboot or redo that show and do it the right way without all of the like restrictions on who you couldn't include or what you could talk about or couldn't talk about or any of those pieces. So to me, it's very selfish, but that was the first one that came to mind. I had another one too, but I feel like every time I throw in a second one, it's what you were going to say. So I'll just,
you weren't going to say what I'm going to say now, because if I remember correctly, I don't even think you watched this show. So I don't think you're going to say, what is it?
24. 24 with Jack Bauer. I think there is something missing in the world of television today of the appointment viewing, right? Yeah. And it would be like kind of the, oh gosh, I need to, tune in this week to see what happens next on 24. It ended on a cliffhanger. I thought Kiefer Sutherland playing Jack Bauer, and the show wasn't perfect, like in any way, shape, or form. But I thought his portrayal, my gosh, I mean, you want to talk about a sense of urgency. that was another one that I think you could do it with an older Jack Bauer now with a sidekick or a team that he's leading or whatever it would be.
Sure.
But to me, that was my other answer.
And you're right. The world needs more of that today on television. I had a couple that I definitely thought about as well. And I kind of feel like Joe from Queens right now. Like I ask a simple question and like Joe's got to make it into like 10,000 rules and, just cutting corners and stuff like that. Cause there's a lot I could say. Everyone knows The Office is my favorite show of all time, but I wouldn't say The Office because I feel like it ended perfectly. Like it doesn't need, that was it. That's the way it was supposed to end. So I can't say that. I would have said years ago to Sopranos because you could have kept telling that story, what happened to Tony died, and you could have picked up shortly thereafter if you wanted to reboot that, but too much time has passed. Game of Thrones, I thought about as well, but then I'm like, nah, it kind of like there was enough resolution. I'm picking a show that, again, I'm pretty sure you didn't watch this. Schitt's Creek. I think we talked about this before. You said the world needs more of it, like with 24. And you're right. The world in a screwed up place right now with so much unhappiness and just melodrama all the time. Schitt's Creek to me was the most down to earth, cool show, a feel good show, and without spoiling it, because maybe someday you'll watch it. But I will
watch it.
All the characters: David, Alexis, Johnny, Moira, Stevie. They all survive. Again, this is a light show, but everybody's good at the end and ends happy. But this is a show that if you wanted to reboot it, you can easily pick up 6 months, a year later, and still tell a story that would be entertaining and still feel good. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Schitt's Creek. That's going to be my answer. And someday Anthony will watch that. Got to watch it, man. It's such a good show, man. You like Ted Lasso? I'd be willing to bet money that you would like. You'd have to get through the first season because it starts kind of annoying and a little bit slow. And then it gets better and better. Each season gets better. Anyway, all right. Question 2. A non-Bills sports jersey that you own, or if you don't have any, that have owned, is blank.
Yeah. So in the past, and I've told some of this story before, like my favorite thing used to be like going to the Champion outlet and you'd be like digging in the crates, like here's this big crate. It'd be like $3, everything. And, that's when Champion would have the NFL contract. Like it wasn't today where you're paying $300 for a jersey or whatever kind of going on. And I had a Steve McNair, Houston Oilers jersey.
Oh, really?
Or Titans, whatever it was, like the baby blue, white and red. And this was when I was in college at Siena. So like, you're on a college campus and you're like the one person with a Steve McNair jersey. That was it. So that was one that, just always kind of stood out. Like my buddies always knew, like, if I didn't have something Bills on at the time, like just this random, like, oh, this was cool. It's $3. Like, yeah, I'm good. And kind of went with it. So
fun fact, I'm not a jersey guy. I've always, any sport, I always have hated the way jerseys look on me. I just never felt comfortable in them. And that includes Bills stuff too, by the way. If you were to look at my closet right now, I have 2 Bills jerseys. One of them is a Josh Allen jersey, which my daughter got me for Christmas a couple years ago. And the other is a Dante Whitner jersey that one of my friends got me as a gag when I moved to Florida because he knows Dante Whitner and I hated each other still. I still can't stand him. So he got me a Bills 20 Dante Whitner jersey as a gag. I really have not had a lot of jerseys in my lifetime, especially non-Bills. Derek Jeter's the last one I can remember having. I did have a Derek Jeter jersey, pinstripe classic Yankees jersey, and didn't have his name on the back because they don't have their names on the back, and just the number 2. So yeah, mine's Jeter, but I've never been. You strike me as a guy who would rock some jerseys. I'm the opposite. They just never felt good on me. I never liked the way they looked on me.
Yeah, I did every so often, but like I said, I mean, it was kind of like back in the day, not making that type of a commitment. And then other, jerseys that you would get, then a guy gets traded, whatever. It just kind of like, it's like, what am I doing here? So I think now as I've gotten older, I'm like, not for me.
You won't catch me dead spending $100 to $150 or more on a jersey of a current player anymore. Not in today's sports world where players get traded and cut literally all the time. Like if I were going to go buy a jersey right now, I'd go buy a former player, a guy who's done, who's retired. Like if you go buy a Thurman Thomas jersey, that jersey's forever. You go buy a Stephon Diggs. There's a lot of people trying to get, you look and Stephon Diggs jerseys are 30%, of what they were now. Or a lot of people, those are going to be stuffed in their closet and they're not going to be wearing them anymore. And it's just the way it goes with sports jerseys. I'll always buy a hoodie or a t-shirt or a polo shirt with the logo on 10 out of 10 times for that reason. All right, last one here. We live in a world where print newspapers and print magazines are pretty much dying. What's your favorite print magazine of all time? It is blank.
Sports Illustrated. I mean, listen, for the era when we were growing up, I mean, and I was trying to think, is there something more of an original answer? And it was just like, for that weekly publication to come out, and you think in this day and age, right, of just so many different writers that we follow, you think of the birth of The Athletic, what Ty Dunn does. I mean, there's so many, places online where you can find this, but each week, like that was who's going to be on the cover, what are going to be the feature articles, right? Like, I mean, being able to sit down and just be like, okay, first thing I'm going to look at is, what was it? Faces in the crowd, right? Like you'd have those, like 4 kind of localized things, and you'd just be like, is there someone from the region or whatever type of thing taking place? You'd go through, and I'd flip through the entire magazine first just to be like, what do I want to prioritize? Like, what do I have to read first? And would kind of get through everything and, would basically read the entire magazine each and every week. Yeah. And you just had just some great contributors. I mean, right, you can think back, and I don't want to just start throwing out names because I think I might screw it up based on that time, but it would just be like, yeah, I mean, it was, when that showed up in the mail, it was always a good day.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, my answer would definitely be Sports Illustrated too. As somebody who grew up wanting to be a sports writer when I was a kid, that was a cover-to-cover magazine, and I would literally read every story. Even if it was about a sport like, say, figure skating or tennis that I wasn't really big on, I would still read that story. They were just, it was so good. I used to love reading, man. Before the internet, before Google, before now you read everything online, like even the Buffalo News, I'll read a story here and there, but like I used to read the newspaper. I used to get the Buffalo News and I would read it. Not, I don't want to say cover to cover, but I would go through each section and I would read. I'd spend a good chunk of every day doing a lot of reading. I miss that. I miss doing reading.
It's a lost, I don't call it a lost art, but like when you talked about reading a profile on an Olympic athlete, maybe that you would never, in today's day and age, right? You would never go search out. Yeah. You really wouldn't, unless like, someone, if you came to me and said, Anthony, you need to read this. Yeah, then I would, but not just that piece of like, all right, well, I read everything else in the magazine. Now I got to read this one. And you come away from it having such a deep appreciation for that athlete or their struggle or what they've accomplished that you didn't even know anything about before then. And then you walk away just feeling like, and I'm drawing a blank on who it was, the columnist. It was like the last page, right? Like, and it was always something that kind of made you think, and I'm drawing a blank on the name.
Rick Riley?
Yes. Right. Yeah. Like it was kind of every single week. And it would just be like, here's something that you would be reading and you would just step away from it and just be like, oh man, like this was, it was an opinion piece, but it was usually something that was heartfelt, had some meaning behind it. And it was just, we don't do that anymore. You go to your Twitter feed and it's like, well, yeah, I've gotten it to the point now that it's like, I'm only seeing what I want to see. And if something else, I'll block or I'll mute or I'll just like ignore it. Yeah, that was a great time to kind of just learn about things that you weren't expecting to.
Sure. And then it wasn't always even just serious reading too. Like I was a wrestling magazine guy. I'd go to the newsstand every month to get my 3 or 4 wrestling magazines. Mad Magazine too was one of my favorites, silly ass magazine, but I would read that from cover to cover every week. And then I used to like the Sports Digest. I mean, Golf Digest, Baseball Digest, those little ass ones.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I loved those. So yeah. Anyway, all right. So next week, I kind of want to give a little preview here. I want to talk about sustainability of being good for the Buffalo Bills. This is something that we don't talk about enough. I was looking up a stat. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. We'll end by me asking you this. How many teams do you think in the NFL right now have had more than 4 consecutive winning seasons?
Oh gosh. Like current streak right now?
Current streak, current. Yep. There's I almost gave it away.
I don't know. I was gonna say 4.
You're not half of that. 2.
Yeah.
There's only been 2 teams in the whole NFL that have had it or more than 4 consecutive seasons of having a winning season.
Yeah.
The Bills are one of them. It's the Bills who have done it 5 straight years now, and the Kansas City Chiefs who have done it 13 consecutive seasons, winning seasons above 500. Those are the only 2 teams in the whole NFL that are at least at 5. So I kind of want to talk about sustainability, and that'll be a main thing that we do next week. But anyway, if you missed, because it's Memorial Day on Monday, so go back. I had Lindsay Moper from Channel 2 on, and Lindsay was awesome, man. She's kind of new to the market, young, early to mid 20s, and she's already in a mid-major market, and she's crushing it. I had a really good interview with her. That was a lot of fun. And again, Thursday, I'll be live from Imperial Pizza. I'm going to have Brianna Aldridge from Channel 7. She will be with me. I'm looking forward to that as well. All right, Anth. Thank you, man. Always a good time talking to you, catching up, and be back next week.
Good to see you, man.
All right, guys, be back. Brand new show on tomorrow. Talk to you then.